Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your clients' peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
Welcome back to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Katie Beth Hand. My guest today is a certified financial planner who has spent decades helping clients unpack the emotional impact of money. She's the author of the new book, Your Money Has Feelings, and I'd like you to join me in welcoming her to the show. Welcome, Shannon Ryan.
Thank you, Katie. I'm excited to be here with you.
Absolutely. So before we dive in, I've got a lot of questions. I love your take on your view of money and how emotions impact, and really how money impacts a bunch of different areas of our life. But before we dive in with all those questions, would you take just a few minutes, Shannon? You have over 30 years of experience that you're drawing from. So tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what has led you up to this point and what really inspired you to get into this industry in the first place.
So I have, it sounds crazy. I've been fascinated with money since I've been 13 years old, and not just having money or what a stock or a bond was, but why people did what they did with their money, which given my age, that we weren't talking about emotional competence back then. Meaning, and so as a 13-year-old, I had been out for a walk with my dad one night, and one of the wealthiest guys on our block was building a new house. And my dad stopped to talk to him. And I'm looking down thinking, I don't want to stand here. The adults are talking, and I'm looking at his shoes. And his shoes had a little bit of mold on the edge of it because he was rebuilding his house and he was on a construction site. And we walked away, and I'm a 13-year-old girl is saying, well, gosh, he can afford whatever he wants. Why does he have mold on his shoes? And my dad said, money is different to everyone. He's not trying to impress you with his money. He's on a construction site. And so my money lessons and interest with money started at a very young age. And then I went into the financial planning field, and I specifically chose financial planning. I mean, I went in to be a CFP. I have my master's of science in financial planning, which was not normal at that time. I remember my dad saying, why did you go with this firm and not that firm? I said, because I want to be a wealth advisor, not a broker. And he's like, what's the difference? We really didn't know the difference back then. Clear difference today. And I went in, and it was still in the beginning, 30 years ago, was a lot about the numbers, meaning what what returns were you getting, what stocks were you picking? And we were just getting into the ETF world in the last 20 years. It was mutual funds and individual stocks. And I remember being in client meetings and giving reports around, okay, this is what you earned and you did, and really trying my hardest. A young financial advisor, I want to do a good job, but started to notice in my conversations some what I started to call wounds, meaning habits, things that people believe they should do with their money, but they really wanted something else, but they were carrying something with them that caused them to make decisions around their money that wasn't in alignment with what I believe they truly wanted. And I was fascinated as to how to hold of them. And I started to call it scar tissue, meaning when we all have a wound, it heals and we'll forget that the wound was there, but scar tissue remains. And so I believe I started to see the scar tissue coming at play in people's money. And it wasn't a popular thing to really sit and talk to people about their feelings around money. And what I have learned over the years is that by starting to incorporate and really talk to people about what's important to them about their money, I got investments better. I got the plans better. I mean, really the alignment between money and what's most important to you and what your feelings are about money. Your money has feelings, which, your money doesn't feel anything. You feel a lot about your money. If we can get those things in alignment, not only now, but generationally, what you guys talk about, I think we can live very rich financial lives at any income level.
I love that. It makes so much sense, and you'll appreciate this. I had told you before the podcast, that, the day job is running an estate planning law firm. So our joke with our attorneys at the firm is that they're part attorney, part counselor,
Yeah.
because so many emotional decisions, going through the estate planning process, just like going through the financial planning process, there really is such a huge emotional, it
Yeah.
affects the beliefs you carry into it. It affects, and I love that you touched on this, what you think you need or what you think you should be spending your money on. It really impacts so many of our decisions. And the interesting piece is most people aren't even aware that that scar tissue is something that they're carrying. So I would assume, I don't know, I would assume that having unknown scar tissue, unknown emotional connections with money, I would assume that that's maybe a bad thing. Is that something that holds people back? And how do you address that?
You know, it's my experience that everyone has some level of wound or scar tissue or deep belief or habit that has been formed around money. And it's typically, or at least I should say 95% of the people report statistically, that it started from the family of origin, from their parents, from the community that they grew up in, that the beliefs, the habits, the words that their parents used, the fights that they had, the things that maybe they had to go without as a child started to form some of those early fears, their desire to have money for certain reasons that didn't align with them today, but we carry it throughout our lives. And I wouldn't classify it as good or bad. I would classify it as a need to know, meaning that when you do something habitually over and over, and it's, I can't seem to save money, or I really want something, I'm not worth that. We say these things over and over in our minds, and sometimes we don't even know where they're coming from. And I know, Katie, that you guys see this in legacy, meaning when somebody comes in to start talking about estate planning, which is a key component to everything we do in financial planning, because even down to the point of I'm opening an account, Katie, for somebody, it's got to be titled in a certain way, right? So the title will go into the estate planning. But I would submit to you that we don't just pass assets generationally, we pass emotions, beliefs, and habits around money. And some of those are really negative. We use money as power and control, and yet we can align money and what's important to us and teach and break some of those generational habits that we've been passing.
Absolutely. So I love that. Getting that emotional background is so powerful and so essential in really creating kind of a plan for what we deal with on the estate planning side is clients coming in thinking they know what they need and having to say, hold on, hold on, hold on. Tell me what you want the future to look like. We're going to work backwards from there. Is that what is it similar on the financial advising side?
Exactly. So very similar, I think, when you are first sitting down with somebody, you're saying, what is your legacy? How do you want your money, your legacy to be handled? And then you're creating documents to make sure that within our legal system, it gets executed exactly the way they want it to be done. Otherwise, it may not. Believe me, if you don't have a great estate plan, I'm the financial advisor that ends up dealing with some of those messes afterwards. So I always say it's the last ribbon that you tie in a gift to your family is your estate plan, meaning you've been giving gifts your whole life. Don't forget the most important gift. But what happens when you first sit down with somebody in my office, people will come in with a stack of, and now of course some of this electronic as well, but they come in with everything they've done. Here's my 401k and here's my savings and I've paid my debt off and my house is done. And they come in with all of these. I look at all the things that I've done. Am I on track? Can I retire? Can I pay for my kids' education? My daughter's getting married next year. Do I have enough money? And they come in with this stack and they hand it to me. And what they're looking for, I think in many cases, is like, am I going to make it? Do I have enough to retire and do the things I want? And one of the first things that I'll typically do makes people a little nervous. And it sounds like you do the same thing. I physically push that stack aside and I say, I I can't wait to see what you've done. I'm sure you've done some great things. And they'll say, well, I think I have. You can hear the hesitance, like they're nervous. They want you to look at it and from them. And I'll say, this is all great. But what is this for? Meaning, can you really articulate to me why you have assets and why you've saved and why you've invested what's your end game? Meaning where are you going and what's most important to you and your family? And then sometimes as I'm digging into that, so that's the first kind of nervous. And I can't tell you how often people go, huh, I guess I want to retire. Doesn't everybody want to retire? And so they haven't thought about it for themselves. And I'm sure you've had that. I shared with you before we started this, that I literally just came out of a 2 hour meeting with clients and we're talking about estate planning. And they've got a very nice estate due to a business sale. And and the question is, all right, what is your legacy on it? Talking about estate planning. And they went, yeah, that's something to think about, right? So we just don't take enough time to think about it. So that moving it aside and starting where you guys start and where we start is, what is this for? Will bubble up a lot of those words that I hear, and I'm sure you do. Well, I should, I know I should buy a house. I should probably retire by the time that should start to come forward. And you can start to question, is that yours, or is that something you think you should do? And so, with a line of questioning, we can generally dig in pretty quickly. And after 30 years, you start to hear certain language that allows us to, as you said, kind of be a counselor, ask the next question, ask the next question. I actually do believe that there is an entire area now of behavioral financial therapy that is really important. And I know that we get that a lot in our offices. And so we talk to people a lot on that level. But I think there are some dysfunctions, severe dysfunctions that some people have about money, that what we're talking about is just recognizing those wounds. And once you've recognized them, you typically can't unsee it. So if you're doing something habitually that your mom always did, or I always laugh that my dad, if the market was down, it was a bad day. Stock market's down. Well, the stock market's down some days. It doesn't make it a bad day. It just makes it a normal day on the stock market. But if the market was up, it was a good day after work. If market was down, it was a bad day. And that's his habit, something that I recognize now as a dysfunction around money. He was allowing his emotions to be pulled, but that's something I'm sure that he got from his father. So we don't have to continue to live that, but there's some real serious dysfunctions around money where people are using it as control or power, and often because they were taught to, where somebody actually may need a real therapist around money to get beyond some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I 100% believe that. And you can see that toxicity. And it's interesting, it usually is a learned behavior, it's a generational thing. When you start to dive into that, why do you feel this way? Why do you treat it like that? Why are we using money as power or holding it over someone or using it for guilt or to inspire shame? Typically, it's because that's how it worked in a parent relationship that they grew up watching. So it
Yes.
really is part counselor trying to go back and figure out why this is happening, help them recognize that, and then create a path forward. So the work that you do is really inspiring and it's really, really important. I love that. Talk to me a little bit about, so at our law firm, we have a lot of blue collar clients. We also have a fair amount of high net worth clients. Do
Mhm.
you see, is there any correlation on your side in financial confidence or competency, or do you see any difference between, maybe high net worth people coming in and their emotional issues, or is it all, when it comes to financial issues, is it across the board?
I think that's a great question, Katie. And I'll tell you why I think it's a great question is I think that if you are somebody that doesn't have the resources to do everything you want, and that's the majority of the world. I'm just telling you right now, most of us have to make decisions, meaning we have a certain amount of money, we have to learn to live within our means or earn money, get a second job, and we have to make decisions that are in alignment with what we want, with what we have. But I think there's always this fantasy, right? Like if I won the lottery, or if I ended up with a bunch of money, or I got a giant inheritance, or if somebody could just drop an extra $1 million into my checking account today, everything would be fine. And so I think that's where people believe that if somebody who is, as you said, more blue collar or doesn't have as much resources as somebody who would be considered a white collar, and somebody who had a big trust fund, or somebody that had unlimited resources in somebody else's mind. No one has unlimited. Everyone has limited, even the wealthiest people. But what I find is there's different types of dysfunction in each one of these, meaning that I had a client, and this taught me, gosh, this is one of my early clients. I had a client come into my office. I had just done Good Morning America. I used to do a lot of the networks, and I'd done Good Morning America, and he had seen me on TV. And it always killed me that you see somebody on TV and that gives you credibility, right? Because you were on TV. But anyway, so he had been so scared to talk to a financial advisor. He was a doorman at the Marriott in the area in which I worked. And he had recognized me on TV and said, "Oh, I trust you. I didn't, didn't know who to trust. And but we got some inheritance." I'm like, awesome, because we just don't know what to do with it. I'm blue collar. I'm doorman. My wife is a teacher. This is more money than we know what to do with. And they had over 800,000, and this was 25 years ago. They had $800,000 in stock certificates that they were keeping in their basement
Oh,
in on the East Coast. The stock certificates are like cash, team. This is like keeping
right.
your dollar bills in the basement that could flood any minute and it could be gone. Typically, you keep a stock certificate at street value or in street name at a brokerage account. So keeping it in the basement. So we pulled it all together. But what amazed me about this couple is they had 4 children. They hadn't touched this inheritance. They'd helped each child find loans, scholarships, and grants. Every one of their kids had gone to college. They took modest they lived well within their means. They were one of the happiest financial families I had ever worked with. And so I learned early on, it's not the income level. We're all different income levels. Someone's always going to have more. And there are genuinely people in this world that I'm not addressing right now that don't even have enough to have the conversation. There is true poverty. So, but somewhere in between, the rest of us have decisions to make around money. We get to choose what we're going to be doing day in and day out with our money at whatever level our discretion is. I find that the greatest amount of happiness comes when you align that money with what's most important to you, even at the higher levels. I have had some clients that have had tens of millions of dollars that have no happiness and enjoyment of their money because they're holding on to it so tightly, or they think it defines them. So if they let it go or give it away, my only value to my family is my money. So that's when it starts to get being used as power, or they think that they're going to lose it tomorrow. So they live like a bag person. I have one woman who I love her, but she'll say, "I still have bag lady syndrome, Shannon." She's got more than she'll ever spend, but she can't even buy a new pair of tennis shoes to keep her knees safe while she's playing tennis because they're $100. Because what if it's all gone tomorrow? So
Right.
there's no wealth level that you get to that I have found that's not without some level of angst around money. And it's hard for someone who doesn't have it to believe that.
Right.
It
No,
does make it easier. It does make it easier. Money makes
yeah,
life a little easier.
money does make life easier. And it's so funny that you say that. I love that whole story because it's true. We always think, I mean, how many times have you thought, gosh, if somebody would just leave me
Yes.
even $100,000? I mean,
Yes.
and I remember being younger and thinking, man, if somebody would leave me $1,000, right? Like that would solve all my problems.
Huge.
And
Yeah.
so that's the mentality we carry. And so this story kind of piggybacks off of that. My partner at the law firm, he's been practicing law for, 50 years. And he has noticed this trend his entire career that not a single one of our clients ever comes in and thinks that they're wealthy.
Yeah.
So when he talks to clients, typically it plays out. He'll say, well, what do you think, what does wealth look like to you? And it's typically about 3 times whatever it is they have. That's when people get wealthy. So even if they come in and they have $1 million, it's somebody that has maybe $3 or $4 million. Those are the people really comfortable, really living. We
Mhm.
had a client that came in that had, 15, $20 million and said, "Oh, it's the people with this much more that are really, and literally said to Stan, what do you do with?" And he was a $20 million client, and he said, "What do you do with with complicated clients, like when you have wealthy clients come in?" And so it's so interesting our view of wealth. It's always that next step. But
True.
it is true. But I love the story about the doorman because really, to some degree, once you have enough wealth and enough the healthy mindset that goes with it, you don't have to be a multimillionaire to be happy. You can live within your means and have an absolutely wonderful life. So I love the doorman story that really touches on that emotional side of the healthy side of what financial security can really look like.
But I guess it all comes down to this is if you don't know what you want, how do you know if you have enough for it? So as you were talking about your clients, what is wealthy? Well, wealthy to me is that you have the resources to live your beautiful life the way that you want to, period. And that could look like something different for everyone. Being a financial advisor, I'm sure being an attorney, I'm at a holiday party or whatever, someone will say, okay, how much do I need to retire? I think I'm getting close to retirement. I'm like, I don't know how much you're spending or what you want to do in your life. I'm like, why is that relevant? I'm like, because you may want to spend $10,000 a year. You may want to spend $60,000 a year. That's a huge difference in whether you're ready or not, because you have to have enough money saved up. So, but what happens is that we keep this striving and we forget to stop to say, okay, I have everything I need. And that was with the doorman. He and his wife had everything they needed before before I took these stocks out of the basement. And so it was hard for them to figure out what to do with the money because they were so beautifully happy where they are. And I think this level of, we can strive and have goals and retire. I'm a planner, so I'm all about goals. Let's, figure out retirement. And do you want to educate your kids or do you want to take a trip every year? Like, dream, where do you want to live? You are in, you and I are in different parts of the country. Like, where do you want to live and the lifestyle you want to live? Figure out what you want, then figure out how to get it for yourself. And then the real wealth is that when you get it, that you recognize you have it and you feel satisfied. And the only way ever having a hope of getting to that level of money, what I call happiness, is you got to know what you want. Because if you don't know what you want, not what your parents wanted, not what your best friend wants, not what your community wants, but what you really want. And I've sat across from people and I've told them to sell houses that they said, oh, look at me, I'm successful, but they weren't able to travel. But they told me their number one goal was travel. I'm like, well, you need to either downsize, get a second job, or go rent because you can't travel. They said, but I have a house. I'm like, well, is the house making you happy? So I'm talking about radical alignment of what's important to you and your money.
There's so much wisdom. We need to put all of that on a t-shirt for you to wear around because people need to hear that. We're in a social media society, we are in a LinkedIn society. And so more than ever, that appearance of wealth and that appearance of success becomes so important to people's own detriment, to the point that they're so busy trying to look happy that they've lost their happiness. And that's a hard thing when people realize they might come to see you and they may have been living that way for 20, 30,
Yeah.
40, 50 years. That's a hard thing to reconcile. When you were talking about kind of planning for the future and do I have enough to retire?
Yeah.
So one simple solution for that, obviously, whether you're still working or whether you're planning for retirement, is creating a budget. But in some of the other things that I've seen you do, you've talked about the fact that budgets sometimes fail. They're not always the solution. So tell our listeners a little bit about why budgets aren't always the solution and what actually works.
I don't think the word budget works. And I'll tell you why. It's kind of like go jump on the scale. How many of us are really excited to jump on the scale? I mean, I'm sure if you're in your fit of your life and you're wearing exactly what, but I'm telling you as a woman, it's like I always joke with my doctor. If I go in to see my doctor, she puts me on the scale and then she takes my blood pressure. And I'm like, really? Like you don't think my blood pressure is going to go up? You just put me fully dressed in the middle of the day on a scale. So it's a measure, and then for some reason we measure ourselves. It's a negative connotation. Weight shouldn't be. It is what I weigh. What I weigh. Your budget is what it is. We shouldn't put a negative connotation. But when somebody says the word budget, we feel restricted. I can only do so much. So it's a negative word. So what I like to think of it is more of what is your cash flow, meaning what's coming in and what's going out. And it's really hard to get our hands around it because we lie to ourselves. We tell ourselves that we don't spend money certain areas. And as clear as we can get with ourselves on what we're really spending, the better chance you have of accurately predicting what you're going to need to earn, what retirement looks like, and everything else. So how do you get there without like, oh shoot, I got to track. had this, I had that. I mean, this whole notion like, well, maybe we need to stop buying a Starbucks coffee every day that I think our industry said for a while drives me crazy. If the most important thing to you every day is walking into Starbucks because you know the barista and they make you happy, and that $5 cup of coffee makes your day every day, don't cut that out. That's important to you. And so let's look at something else. So the easiest way of figuring out what I would call this baseline cash flow, meaning what do you need is, and I do this still every single year, and this is a good time of year to do it. So we're in the beginning of the year right now, but if you take an entire year of bank statement, go back to 25 or to 24 and look at your primary checking account. Most of us have a primary checking account where cash flow is coming in. Paychecks are coming in. We're paying checks out of, we have one or two credit cards that hopefully we're putting money on there to get all the points and then paying them off at the end of the month. So go to the primary place that you're spending. Take a look at every dollar that was spent each month. And it will change because why this is important to do it over, I would say 12 months, is because then you hit the holidays, you hit the unexpected need for tires. We always say, well, that month was different because the refrigerator broke, or it was my daughter's birthday, or, it was the holiday season. It happens every year. That's part of what you spend. So if you take that over an entire year and you take every month what you spent, add it up, divide it by 12. You will be shocked if you do that for at least the last couple of years. And your bank that you're working with or your credit union should have all those statements from the last couple. You can do this easy peasy today. You could get the statements and then you divide it by 12. Here's what I find with most people. It's a little shocking because they're spending more than they're telling themselves in their head because they're going, well, my rent or my mortgage is this, my car payment's this is how much I'm spending on food. They're forgetting entertainment. I got my nails done. I had my hair done. I did, and you do all those things. So let's not lie to ourselves. So add it all up, divide it out. That is basically your monthly run rate. And from that, do you have enough income coming in to cover that? And a good way of knowing if you don't is that all of a sudden you're seeing debt increase. If you're seeing credit cards increase ongoing, you're probably overspending your run rate on a monthly basis. And that's where people get themselves into really difficult credit, debt type spirals. And I have a couple of videos out there that talk about how to get out of those spirals. We're not going to go into that today, but there's ways of getting out of that. But once you've got the run rate, and you understand your cost of living, it's my experience that it does change a little over time, but we all are very habitual, meaning that it won't change radically. As the kids get older and leave the house, there may be a little less food cost, but there'll be something else that the kids are going to need. You're going to help
And
them
then
with.
there's those grandbabies. So that's an
And there's
added coming
grandbabies.
on. Yep.
Exactly. One could hope. I don't, not to my girls, only 20 and 22, but one could hope someday. But that is the basis of which now you can say, well, what am I going to need for retirement? You have a baseline of understanding of what your cash flow is. But I find that if we say budget, figure out your budget, it's the avoidance game starts. And again, we're playing this to win, not to shame ourselves. I just don't think shame and judgment has a lot of place in money. I just don't.
No, I agree with that. And it's interesting. As soon as you say the word budget, my brain says restriction. My brain says no. My brain almost equates it with like punishment. Like, ugh,
Yeah. Yep.
because how many times, maybe watching growing up with your parents or maybe with your spouse, it's like, oh, well, we've overspent this month. Now we're on a budget. We've got to live on a budget. And it's this negative word. So I love this system for really looking at your cash flow and kind of figuring that out. Looking at finances the way you do is so important, Shannon, because it's not putting anything and labeling it as good or bad.
Mhm.
If you want to go to Starbucks every day, go to Starbucks if that's your happy. Like there's an option for whatever pieces of your life you want to build. The key is and this is the part I think most people miss that you hit on. The key is to figure out what those are and then create a lifestyle around that. And I think that's a place where even a lot of other financial advisors kind of miss the boat. They have clients that come in and they're not really asking the real questions and addressing the emotional side of money. So for our listeners, before we run out of time, I assume your book has a lot to do with this. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write the book and what listeners can expect from that.
I wrote the book to address everything. We have just started the topic today. And I love that your firm is really addressing this on the estate planning side, because money is taught generationally. So you guys are really hitting that generational. I wrote it because there's not enough of us talking. It's still kind of glamorous to say, I bought this and I sold that, I'm in Bitcoin. And to me, it's not what you're invested in. Frankly, let me let you in on a secret. None of that's that hard. And frankly, we all offer the same stuff. What really makes people find that point of satisfaction, joy, and happiness is when their money is in alignment, and it has to do with a lot of emotional things that we carry that we don't know. So when I wrote the book, Your Money Has Feelings, again, I know money doesn't have feelings, but we have so many feelings around money that I wanted to tell some. There's a lot of stories in the book. I have it on Audible book as well, so it's easy to listen. It's a short read, a short listen. But what I'm hearing from people is, for the first time, they feel seen and they understand. And I'm removing the guilt as well, because we don't get very far with guilt. I love working with my clients. I have a robust practice still. I hope to practice for another 10 to 15 years, but I can only touch so many people. So I wanted to take 30 years of knowledge and touch a broader audience. And that's ultimately why I wrote the book.
That's fantastic. No, I love that. Okay, last question. And this might be the hardest one, actually.
Okay.
So through the work that you've done these last 30 years, through your work with the book, what do you hope your legacy will be?
I hope that I helped our industry that I think is broken with ticker tapes and so forth, that only focusing on the money side, shift to see the human, to see the person that is interacting with the money, and to create happier financial lives for a broader amount. I hope that I have an impact on how we view money.
That's a fantastic goal and a fantastic answer. Okay, so I could continue to ask you questions all day, but I know that you have real work to do. So thank you so much for joining in. And for our listeners, thank you for joining us. This has been the Legacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Katie Beth Hand. And my guest today was Shannon Ryan. And to connect with Shannon, you can find her at shannon-ryan.com. And she is also on all forms of social media. And we will link all of those for you in the show notes so that you can go out and connect with her and continue to learn more from her. Be sure you also grab a copy of her book. Shannon, thank you so, so much for joining us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Katie. I enjoyed being here, and thank you for the good work that your office is doing as well. It takes many of us doing this work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.